From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports Leadership Series. After years of providing insight on the business of gaming, we decided we would invite some of the biggest names in the industry to give you a window into their management style, leadership lessons, and so much more. These are the most successful people in all of esports, and you have a front row seat to learn from them, absorb their knowledge, and hopefully come away with a deeper understanding of what it takes to manage and lead successfully in the gaming world. On this episode, we have none other than Jimmy Baratta, a very good friend of mine. He's an esports instructor at University of California, Irvine. He's an investor in XSET. He's an advisor to tons of companies in the gaming and esports space. Jimmy, welcome.
Hey, Paul. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Jimmy, let's jump into it. I got so many questions for you. You've been on the podcast, by the way, so people have probably seen you there. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and primarily how you got involved with gaming and esports and why you were interested in it. Like, what attracted you to it?
Yeah. I started off as an attorney out of school. I did 4 years at USC, 3 years at Loyola Law School, practiced in civil litigation for about 7 years. And in my free time, I was always gaming. And what I noticed actually was most Sundays, I would stop watching football and I would start watching Twitch. I would start playing Destiny raids with my friends. And you kind of just notice that your time shifts from one area to another, or that your interests either change or further, uh, they get further entrenched in wherever they may lie. And esports was definitely the calling. And as the industry picked up, I was fortunate to have some really close friends that noticed I wasn't on Twitch, or that I wasn't recording my gameplay or taking an active interest in the industry. And they said, hey, you should really focus there because there's a lot happening and it might be a good place.
Would you say then it was like one of the reasons you jumped, or the reason you even saw the opportunity was not only your own experience, but other people telling you, hey, you should really be looking at this, or we think, this is something you'd really be excited about? What is it? People like close to you, friends, family, colleagues?
Twice a week I have game night with two of my best friends, and one of them I'll go with his username A Town because I don't know if he wants his real name all over the internet. A Town was basically like, hey, you're not on Twitch and you love gaming as much as I do, and he knew I wasn't necessarily happy in the legal field, so he said, "You should think about this area," and I give him a lot of credit because he really shifted my focus to what was going on in esports.
And what do you, when you look at the state of the industry today, what do you think of it, and how do you think it's going to evolve? Like, what are some of the big themes you see happening over the next few years?
Do you think, is that specific to esports or gaming at
esport,
large, right?
or esports
Yeah,
or gaming at
yeah,
large, I would say.
because that's the thing, right? Esports is a subsect, it's a small niche vertical of the gaming industry. And gaming, as we know, is bigger than what last I checked, I think it was Nielsen that reported. It's larger than music and traditional movies and other cinema combined, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mind-blowing statistic. Doesn't necessarily, I think, amaze people in the industry, in our industry, as much as it does other people that are in music and in cinema. But esports in particular, right, being a small niche vertical there, really leading, I think, a lot of headlines to gaming, right? People maybe didn't pay attention to Xbox sales as much before there were competitive Xbox tournaments. I don't think people paid as much attention to uh, publicly traded video game companies, or just the headlines that you cover every week on your show before esports really was trending. And so while esports is a niche 10%-ish vertical of the gaming industry at large, um, that's my guess there. I think don't take that to the bank. But while esports is a subsect of gaming, I don't think gaming was as large as it was, or at least as mainstream as it was before esports brought that competitive light and brought all those big names and headlines where, hey, you could be a high school dropout and still make six figures competing, right? So in the future, I think it just becomes more and more mainstream, honestly. I think the infrastructure is already there. The money's certainly already there. The viewership and the audience are growing every year. It's really going to be now, I think, more niche verticals, more subsections of video games that take stride and have their place in the spotlight. That's my belief.
And Are there specific trends you're watching that you're paying attention to, or things that you get particularly excited about when you look at the space today?
I'm really interested to see how crypto integrates itself with esports. I think the audience is a natural user, or a natural, they're naturally going to adopt that platform and that way of doing things. Um, I mean that's easy to say, I think, because it's in all the headlines today, right? Whether it's NFTs or crypto payouts for tournaments, because maybe there were some shady companies that weren't, being legitimate with their pay structures. I'm definitely interested in that. That's off the top of my head, of course. I think if we were to dive into a longer discussion, we could point five or six things that are really going to stick around or take off.
Now let's zoom into your own career. Well, like, could you tell me maybe something that you believe you did right when you got started or got involved in the esports and gaming industry? Like something that you can point back to and say, I was really smart there. I did something really good there when I started.
Yeah. Wow. You know, reflecting on only a brief 3, 4 year career here, which required a lot of patience, honestly. I think the thing I did best was, besides having a sense of patience, I think was not letting certain things get to me. And by that I mean, and I mentioned this on your podcast as well, for the listeners that have or haven't listened to that episode yet. You're going to go through a lot of rejection in any industry, in any career path. And by being resilient and not taking things personally, you leave the doorway open, because especially in esports and video games, it's a small community. And I can't tell you how many times I've come across the same people over and over again. And perhaps they would treat me differently now had I not been gracious and understanding and patient and not overly emotional, I suppose, when I was rejected in the past, when I was just a young pup with not much to offer and with a lot to learn. So I think the thing I did best was not take things personally and stay resilient. And that's definitely a trait and something I need to credit to my fiance, who really instilled that in me and was always supportive, telling me, hey, it's going to happen. Be patient. Keep at it.
It's a lot easier to say than to do. It's such great advice, but it's patience, especially, and resilience are those things, and they go hand in hand. Are one of those things that, like, in the moment, it's really hard to manifest. It's not trivial. But love the advice. Um, on the other hand, can you look back and share maybe something that now you see it was a mistake, or
Oh yeah,
that you did wrong, and maybe what you learned from it? Obviously, more importantly.
definitely. Lot of mistakes. I think if you don't have a mistake, you're not learning and you're not doing it right. No, because no one does it perfectly. And if you are doing it perfectly, you're probably making mistakes and don't know it yet, right? One of my biggest mistakes early on, because I assume this is for an early stage, a person that's early in their transition,
Yeah.
is, I used to go into some meetings looking for the job, hoping for the opportunity, for the offer, not realizing that these people are betting. It's a vibe check, really, is the colloquial, casual way of saying it. First meetings in business, first meetings as individuals that are doing informational interviews. It's all about whether or not you two click, right? And I would go into these meetings thinking this is my opportunity to land something big, not realizing it was my opportunity to meet someone, connect with them on a human level, network with them. Because what you learn in practice is, if you're 6 months or a year into a project and you're getting pinged constantly on whatever form of communication you do, Slack, Discord, email, text, are you going to look at that notification and be like, oh man, now I got to deal with this guy again? Or are you going to look at it and say, oh, I can't wait because we got a big problem and this person, all we get through it together, right? So again, back to step one, that vibe, that vibe check, that connection, I think is really important. And early on, I was completely oblivious to that. I just wanted the job, the opportunity, because I was hungry and I needed to prove myself, not realizing that more oftentimes it's not the opportunity, it's really the fit. Because there's a tremendous amount of opportunities in this space. It's timing and fit, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah, I think, again, it's just really good advice, but people often ignore the reality that business is done between people, and in an ideal world, they have to like you, right? It's not good enough just to be smart or knowledgeable, or right? The person on the other end of that deal has to want to work with you, and that kind of relationship takes time. Like it's not instant and doesn't happen immediately. Um, you had a career, Jimmy, interestingly, like outside of esports as well, right? Have you like when you look back and you compare your experience within esports and outside of esports, do you see any differences the way business is done in general versus how business is done in the gaming and esports industry? Like, are there any differences that you've teased out having been in both?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Actually, I wasn't anticipating it, but it's really funny because when I was an attorney, which I no longer am, but when I was an attorney, you had to realize that everything that was said in email might one day go in front of the judge. So everyone conducts themselves a little differently. Also, you have to realize that people are paying for a high profile or a high powered attorney and they expect something, right? They expect you to be in that suit and tie. There's a great Curb Your Enthusiasm episode with Larry David, and he goes in on a casual Friday and he fires the lawyer because he's wearing jeans. Um, you know, take that to esports. And all my students will tell you this in the very first class. As soon as I start talking, I see a lot of just like angst or just a lot of anxiousness that gets melted because they don't know what to expect. It's our first class of the quarter, and I'm just a regular guy in a hoodie, here to talk about current industry topics and trends and get them to think about things in a different way. And so I think esports is really casual. It's more, we're here because we love it and we want to talk video games and we're smart, but that, and we can accomplish cool things, but it's not like this buttoned up suit and tie thing where you have to have perfect posture, right, and perfect grammar. It's just not that, and I think that's really cool because it's more accepting and open. So that's what I've noticed is that esports is very accepting of different types of people.
Interesting. I mean, in some ways, that's an advantage, right? I would argue that openness, that sort of, it's a bit more easygoing in that sense. It's also, I sometimes think like it's just so accessible as a consequence, right? Like it's not, the barrier to get in is not that high, especially if you like sort of the space and you have the right attitude and the right work ethic. If you had to point at one thing in terms of correlation between something that a person does and success in the esports and gaming industry, what is that one thing you would point at and go, this is what a person needs to succeed in the business of gaming or in the business of esports?
Yeah, this is obviously based off of my personal experience because I think in any industry, most people would answer consistency, right? Doing not a lot, but just something all the time until you break through. And I think that's the case for most industries, for most jobs and career paths, or most things in life, really. But for me personally in esports, my one thing was actually very different. It was creativity, and that's because in my former career path it was cyclical in nature. A lawsuit would be filed, we'd get the matter, we'd respond with, certain documents that had to be, pleadings and things that had to be asserted, discovery, investigation, negotiation, settlement, or trial. Always the same, different facts, different clients, different, things that happened. But it and my father would disagree. I love my dad. He was my mentor I mean, still is, but was for so many years. He's a very successful attorney because it does require for him a degree of creativity on how to defend matters. But at least what I was doing was, you had the blinders up. And in esports, one of the first things I learned was, and maybe this is because I didn't have experience here, I had to be creative in terms of where I wanted to apply myself. And I do think that's the case because if you interview, which I'm sure you do all the time, so many people's backgrounds are rarely a straight path, especially in this industry. Very few people get a degree in, a Bachelor of Science in whatever field, become an engineer, and just, advance and get promoted until they're, the lead of this or that. Oftentimes they dabble here and then they laterally transition there and then they restart careers in another field. Um, and I think that shows that one, we're all looking for what we're passionate about. But for me, I had to be creative and say, what skill set can I come up with that is of value to my clients, that's of value to my projects? Because other than a high level of education, I didn't have a lot to offer. So I had to create for myself opportunity.
Interesting. And I'm curious, and maybe the answer is the same, and maybe I'm asking the same question in a different way. But um, what would be the advice? And I always like ending on this question. What would be the advice you'd give to a young person starting in the world of esports business today? Like, what would that one piece of advice be?
Uh, the one piece of advice would be to stay current on on industry topics and events. The one thing that set me apart in my early stages was that I knew what was going on, and at those meetings, while I was with other very accomplished executives that had grown $100 million whatever companies, not everyone knew the details, the nitty gritty of the industry. They were successful in other fields and in other industries, but not necessarily current on what was going on here. So, knowledge is definitely power, and my ability to say, well, did you know that your competitor already tried that and failed, 6 months ago? Or, well, this company is rumored to launch something very similar, so we should look at it as a case study. Um, Again, I think it's start your day just really entrenched in this world, get as much information as you can, open up the Business of Esports, website and read all the news headlines, because that's going to take you further. I think that type of experience and knowledge and self-learning is going to be as valuable as any project you work on.
Jimmy, I can't thank you enough for all the insight, for all the great advice and learnings, and for the plug for the Business of Esports. Thank you again. Thank you so much. And guys, stay tuned for the next episode.